Hello, everybody. My name is Ms. Edna, and welcome to Aloha Friday Art. I am so excited to introduce you to my guest today. She is a very prolific and award-winning author from Victoria, Australia. And I asked her to come join me today because there's a book that she wrote that relates exactly to the theme that I have going on with this episode, and that is rainbows. So please join me in welcoming Dee White. Hello, Dee.
Hello.
How are
Hello,
you?
everybody. So lovely to be here.
Great. And as I was mentioning, I asked you to come and join me today because you have a book that relates to rainbows. And would you like to introduce that book?
I would. Book Reena's Rainbow, and I love rainbows. And this is about a little girl called Reena. You can see her there with her little dog. Uh-huh. And Reena is deaf, and so she wants to play with all the children in the park, but she has trouble playing some of their games because she's deaf. And so when she plays hide and seek, she can't hear them calling for her. And so she finds a dog in the park, and he's homeless. So they form a really good friendship together, the homeless dog and Reena, and they become friends together with the children in the park. With the help of dog, they find a way to play together.
Oh, wonderful. And can you please share what inspired you to write a story about Reena and the rainbow and why it's called that? Yeah.
Well, I love rainbows. And a few years ago, I started to suffer severe hearing loss myself. And I realised what it must be like for children to be deaf and to feel isolated and not be able to communicate with other people around them because they don't speak the same sign language. And so I really wanted to write a book about a deaf girl, and because I love rainbows, and I really feel like rainbows represent who we are as human beings, because we're all so different, and we've all got our own strengths and things that we're really good at and our talents. And so we are like the colours of the rainbow. You know, we're very individual, but together we're a spectrum of people that make up the human race.
That's beautiful.
So one of my favourite parts in the story is where Reena is feeling unhappy because she tried to play hide and seek with the children and it didn't quite work the way she wanted it to. And so her mother is explaining this to her, that we are like the colours of the rainbow. So this is one of my favourite pages. I'll show you.
Oh, great. And would you mind telling us who the illustrator was for this book?
The illustrator is Tracy Grimwood, and we had illustrated 5 books together before we did this one. So I actually asked for her to be the illustrator on my book because I just love her sensitivity and the movement she has in her drawings and the colour. I love the way she uses colour as well. Wonderful. So on this page, Mum's just explaining to Reena about the situation and about the fact that we are all different. So Reena says, "Why am I different?" Reena asked. Her mother's fingers danced back. "We are like the colours of the rainbow. We are all different. But when we stand together, we are one." And that's basically what I wanted to get across in my story. And Tracy's illustrations are just beautiful, and the way she's represented the colours of the rainbow in her illustrations. And at the start of the book, she shows how Reena doesn't quite fit in and Dog doesn't quite fit in because they don't have, like Dog's brown and Reena doesn't wear colours that are part of the rainbow. And later on at the end, you see that they are all part of the rainbow and part of the world that we all live in.
Do you want to share a little bit more about being the writer and what it's like to write in general, stories like that?
I love being a writer. It's the best job in the world, I suppose, apart from being an illustrator, which I'm not, so I really admire illustrators. But I just like the fact that as a writer, you can just keep creating stories in your head, and you can create worlds and you can create characters and you can create stories like Reena where you can include themes that are personal and important to you.
Like, at what age did you start writing? And
I started when I was 7, and I wrote my first poem when I was 7. And I was asked to read it out at school assembly, which was very scary because I was a very shy 7-year-old. But I really liked the fact that people loved my poem and they responded to the words I'd written. And it was the first time I realised that what you write can really mean something to people. And so that's something that I've carried through in all my writing life. And I didn't decide to write books specifically when I was young, but it was kind of something that grew on me as I got older, because I just kept writing after I was 7. But I've always loved reading books, and then it seemed to be the natural progression to then start writing them. I think it's something, as a writer, you really need to be a reader.
Uh-huh.
You need to love books, and not everybody has a love for books straight away. And some writers develop a love for books later on in their life, and then they become authors.
So I understand you're also a teacher too. You do your visits in the schools or
Yeah,
travel
I do.
around.
I
And
do. I love traveling. The other thing I like besides writing is traveling. And so I like to go anywhere in the world. And I've been to America, and that's where we met at a conference
yeah.
in Los Angeles. So that was so much fun. And I love traveling. So I've done workshops at the Sharjah International Book Fair, and I've presented at conferences in Amsterdam. And so I like to travel and share my love for writing and talk about, how we all create stories. And as I travel, it's also great as a writer to gather resources and research information that you can use later on in your stories.
Say, did you do that for the Reena's Rainbow, for example, on your trips?
Um,
How did you gather for that particular story?
I think a lot of that came from my head, to be honest. I've always loved rainbows, and we have lots of rainbows here.
Okay.
And here in Australia, particularly where I used to live, we used to live overlooking a valley, and there were always rainbows over the valley. So I think that was probably what inspired me and my love of rainbows.
So
And
from memory that it came
yeah,
from that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think the character of Reena, a lot of that came from my own childhood and the sort of child that I was. So I think that's the thing when you're writing or creating children's books, you draw on your own experiences as a child. And I've always loved animals, so I had to have a dog in it. There are animals in most of my stories. They just somehow, even if they don't start out with an animal, one always creeps in. So
And it's usually, I mean, it's any kind of animal because you like all kinds of.
mainly dogs and cats, I think.
Oh, okay.
There have been rabbits and goats as well. So
Okay.
I guess I'm drawing on my own personal experiences of having those kind of pets. But in my latest book, which has just been released, and that's actually a Holocaust story
Mhm.
set in World War II, and somehow my character acquired a cat. And so because I'd written the story without any animals, and now there's a cat, the cats are important in the story. So I think it's just something, that's one of the things I like about writing. You can write about the things you love.